People love miracles. When they don't ask questions, they clap, they smile, they feel lucky, and they move on without wondering why it showed up in their life and not someone else's. A miracle feels random until you look too closely, and most people don't like looking too closely because answers come with responsibility. It's easier to call it chance, fate, coincidence, anything that lets you enjoy the result without examining the reason. But miracles don't arrive out of boredom. They show up when something is out of balance, when something is about to break, when someone is standing at the edge pretending they're fine. A miracle isn't a reward, it's an interruption. It's a pause button pressed on a moment that was heading somewhere dangerous, quiet, or irreversible. That's why it feels shocking. That's why it feels personal. And that's why the real question isn't what happened, but who decided it needed to happen now. People ask where miracles come from, but they rarely ask why they needed one in the first place. They don't want to examine the context. They don't want to admit how close they were to losing something, becoming someone they didn't recognize, or settling into a version of life that would slowly drain them. Miracles expose that gap. They highlight the moment where effort ran out and something else stepped in. A miracle isn't magic glitter sprinkled on a perfect life. It's a disruption aimed at a specific weakness. It lands where patience was thinning, where hope was fraying, where timing was about to cost more than you were willing to admit. That's why it doesn't feel general. It feels targeted, almost uncomfortable in how precise it is. And precision raises suspicion, because if something arrived exactly when you needed it, that means someone or something was paying attention before you were. That idea unsettles people. It suggests you weren't as invisible as you thought, that your struggle wasn't as unnoticed as you assumed, that there's a difference between luck and intervention. Miracles don't erase consequences. They reroute them. They don't fix everything. They give you a window, a narrow one, a chance to step differently, choose differently, stop pretending the same behavior will somehow lead to a different outcome. That is why miracles feel heavy after the excitement fades. They come with an unspoken expectation. You can tell a miracle by what it interrupts. Patterns, spirals, endings that felt inevitable. It does arrive to decorate your life. It arrives to interfere with the direction you were already moving in. And interference always has intent behind it. People say miracles restore faith. Sometimes they do the opposite. They force you to confront how close you were to giving up, how little control you actually had, how dependent you were on something beyond your planning and confidence. That realization can be unsettling because it challenges the story you tell yourself about independence and strength. So when you ask who sent it, you're really asking whether it was random or deliberate, whether it was meaningless or a message, whether it was a gift with no strings or a warning wrapped in mercy. Because if it was sent, not stumbled upon, then ignoring it is neutral anymore. Miracles don't shout instruction. They create silence, space. A moment where you are supposed to notice what almost happened and what still could. And in that quiet, the question lingers longer than the miracle itself, pressing against your thoughts, refusing to let you enjoy the outcome without facing the implication, asking whether you are going to treat this as a lucky break or as proof that something stepped in when you were about to miss. What mattered most, people only notice miracles after the danger has already been interrupted. They don't see the trajectory that was forming. The quiet momentum pulling everything toward an outcome nobody wanted to face. They only see the sudden change and call it lucky, as if luck has timing, as if coincidence shows up precisely when things are about to cross a line that can be uncrossed. Danger rarely looks dramatic while it's building. It looks like routine. like tolerance, like one more compromise that does feel fatal on its own. Trajectories dawn to announce themselves. They curve slowly, subtly, shaping direction without noise. That is why people don panic. Panic would require awareness, and awareness usually arrives late. A miracle interrupts motion, not chaos motion, the steady movement towards something you are slowly accepting as inevitable. That is why it feels shocking, not because it is flashy, but because it stops what you had already made peace with continuing. It does to fight you head on. It steps into the path and forces everything to pause. People like to think they were handling it, that they had time, that they could fix things before they got too far. But trajectories done to wait for confidence. They keep moving whether you are ready or not. A miracle shows up when the distance left is smaller than you think, when the margin for correction is almost gone. That is why miracles feel invasive. They disrupt your narrative. You were adapting, you were coping, you were surviving in a way that didn't look dramatic enough to call dangerous. And then something intervenes, forcing you to acknowledge that survival was slowly turning into surrender. Miracles dawn to arrive to improve a good direction. They arrive to interrupt a bad one. They don't show up when everything is aligned. They show up when alignment is slipping quietly enough that you stopped fighting it. When exhaustion made compromise feel reasonable. When hope became something you postponed instead of practiced. There's a reason miracles feel personal. Trajectories are personal. They are built from your habits, your choices, your silences. An interruption aimed at a trajectory has to be precise. It has to land exactly where momentum is strongest. That precision is unsettling because it suggests observation. It suggests that someone noticed the direction long before you admitted it was a problem. People often ask why now, because later would work, because one more step would change the outcome permanently, because trajectories have points of no return, and miracles show up right before those points, not after. After would be cleanup. This is prevention. A miracle does to erase the path you were on. It reveals it. Suddenly you can see where you were headed, and that realization is uncomfortable. Gratitude mixes with fear. Relief mixes with shame. You realize how close you were to normalizing something that would cost you more than you were willing to say out loud. That is why miracles come with weight. They don't just fix something, they expose something. They show you the version of yourself that was forming the outcome that was becoming more likely with every day you did to change course. They ask you to look at it without blinking. People waste miracles when they treat them as endings instead of interruption. They celebrate the stop without questioning the direction. They thank the moment but keep the habits. And trajectories dawn to disappear just because they paused once. They resume if nothing changes. An interruption is not a solution. It is an opportunity. It buys time. It creates space. It forces awareness. What you do next determines whether the trajectory actually changes or just gets delayed. Miracles dawn come with instructions because instructions would remove responsibility. They don't say do this, avoid that. They simply stop the motion long enough for you to notice you were moving toward something you did to actually want. The dangerous thing is assuming the interruption means the danger is gone. The danger was the direction, not the speed. And direction only changes when behavior does. That is the part people don't like to talk about because it means the miracle ones to the hard part. It means the hard part starts after. When something interrupts a dangerous trajectory, it's not saying you're safe forever. It's saying you're not finished yet, that there's still room to choose differently, that the story hasn't locked into its ending. You can feel the difference between a miracle and a coincidence by what it demands from you afterward. Coincidence lets you relax. A miracle makes you uneasy because it reminds you that staying the same would put you right back on the path that needed interrupting. Trajectories don't care about intention. They care about patterns. A miracle interrupts the pattern long enough for you to see it clearly. And once you see it, pretending you didn't becomes impossible. That's why miracles don't feel light for long. They feel serious, like a warning wrapped in relief, like a pause button pressed by something that noticed you were running out of room, like a chance given not because you earned it, but because the next step would have changed everything in a way you wouldn't be able to undo. And now the path is quiet, paused, waiting to see whether you'll step back onto it out of habit or finally turn while there's still time, while the interruption is still holding the door open, while the trajectory hasn't fully reclaimed its pull, while the moment that stopped it is still fresh enough to matter. Timing is the part people try to explain away because it makes things uncomfortable. They're fine believing something good happened, but the moment you suggest it happened exactly when it needed to, the room gets quiet. Because timing implies intention, and intention implies attention. And attention implies you weren't as unseen as you thought. People like randomness because randomness doesn't ask anything of you. It doesn't judge. It doesn't watch. It doesn't wait. Randomness lets you enjoy the outcome without questioning the reason. Timing ruins that comfort. Timing shows up with a raised eyebrow, asking why this moment, why this version of you, why now and not, before or after. If something arrives too early, you dismiss it. You say you weren't ready. If it arrives too late, you call it tragic. But when it arrives right at the edge, when patience is thinning and options are narrowing, when you're just about to give up or give in, that's when timing starts to feel unsettling, because that's not accidental. That's precise. Deliberate attention doesn't feel warm at first. It feels exposing, like someone noticed what you were trying to keep quiet. Not your words, not your performance, but your internal state. The exhaustion you didn't talk about. The compromise you justified the moment you decided to settle, because resistance was getting too heavy. Timing doesn't care about appearances. It doesn't wait for you to look deserving. It shows up when the internal conditions are right, when one more step in the same direction would lock something in permanently. That's why it feels intrusive. It interrupts right when you were convincing yourself you could manage a little longer. People say everything happens for a reason when they want comfort. They say it sarcastically when they want distance. But when timing is too accurate to ignore, the phrase stops being philosophical and starts being personal. You can't shrug it off. You can't call it vague. It feels like being singled out. Deliberate attention doesn't announce itself with explanation. It lets the timing do the talking. The fact that it arrived before collapse but after denial, before damage but after warning signs, before the point of no return but after you'd already stepped closer to it than you want to admit. That's why timing feels heavy afterward. Relief mixes with discomfort. Gratitude mixes with suspicion. You start replaying moments, realizing how many variables had to align for this to land exactly here. How many chances you ignored before this one forced a pause. People often say they weren't ready for something. Timing ignores that excuse. It arrives when readiness is irrelevant. When growth requires disruption, not permission. When comfort has overstayed its usefulness. When staying the same would quietly cost you more than changing ever could. Deliberate attention isn't about control. It's about intervention. It doesn't micromanage your life. It watches trajectories. It notices patterns forming, and when a pattern starts pointing somewhere destructive, timing steps in to interrupt before momentum does the rest of the work. That interruption doesn't feel gentle. It feels sudden. It feels unfair. It feels like bad timing at first, but later, when you look back, you realize any earlier would have been ignored, and any later would have been too late. People waste a lot of energy asking why something didn't happen sooner. They don't ask why it happened now, because now is harder to face. Now suggests you were being observed long enough for a judgment call to be made. That's something decided. This was the last moment where intervention would still matter. Timing reveals attention because it exposes context. It shows up when you're tired of pretending, when defenses are low, when honesty is closer to the surface than usual. That's not coincidence. That's strategy. You can tell when timing is deliberate by what it disrupts. It doesn't enhance comfort. It disrupts complacency. It doesn't validate your plans. It challenges your direction. It doesn't reward your effort. It questions your choices. People who ignore timing call it luck. People who respect it call it a warning. People who really feel it call it a mirror. Because timing shows you exactly where you were when it arrived, and that reflection isn't always flattering. Deliberate attention doesn't linger. It creates a moment and then steps back. What you do with that moment is up to you. That's the part that makes timing uncomfortable. It doesn't force outcomes. It offers clarity. And clarity is dangerous because once you see the pattern, once you recognize the interruption, it wasn't random. You can't go back to pretending you're drifting aimlessly. You were being watched. You were being reached. And something decided this moment mattered enough to break the flow of your life and make you look directly at where you were headed, right here, right now, before the path closed behind you and timing stopped being an opportunity and became nothing more than a memory you'd wish had arrived just a little sooner. Precision makes people nervous because it doesn't miss. Wide chaos feels safer. You can hide inside it. You can blame the noise, the timing, the world. Precision doesn't allow that luxury. Precision lands exactly where you didn't want anyone looking, and suddenly the parts you cut up with confidence, humor, or silence are exposed under a spotlight you never agreed to stand in. Hidden vulnerability isn't weakness. It's unfinished truth. It's the fracture you learn to live around instead of heal. It's the habit you defend. Because examining it would mean admitting how much control it has over you. Precision doesn't attack strength. It bypasses it. It goes straight for what you protect without realizing you're protecting it. People assume vulnerability looks dramatic. Tears, confessions, breakdowns. That's the obvious kind. The hidden kind looks functional. It looks like competence with cracks underneath, like success held together by routines that can't bend, like composure that depends on everything staying predictable. Precision doesn't care about appearances. It goes for dependence. It finds the one thing you can't afford to lose and taps it gently, just enough to let you feel how thin the wall really is. That's why precision feels personal, because it is. It doesn't challenge the mask, it challenges what the mask is hiding. And when that happens, people react defensively. They say it's unfair. They say it's too much. They say it came out of nowhere. But it didn't. It arrived exactly where the structure was weakest. Hidden. Vulnerability thrives in avoidance, not ignorance. Avoidance, you know it's there, you just keep it busy, you keep moving, you keep performing. You keep distracting yourself with noise and urgency so you never have to sit still long enough to feel it. Precision cuts through that movement. It slows things down just enough for the feeling to surface. Precision doesn't humiliate. It reveals. And revelation is uncomfortable because it removes plausible deniability. Once something touches the exact spot you've been protecting, you can't claim you didn't know it mattered. You can't say it wasn't important. The reaction gives it away. The flinch, the anger, the sudden urge to explain yourself. People like broad challenges, big speeches, general motivation. Those let everyone feel inspired without feeling seen. Precision doesn't inspire first, it unsettles first. It makes you aware of the specific place where effort stops working and avoidance starts doing the heavy lifting. Hidden vulnerability often sits beneath identity. You don't just protect the wound, you protect the story built around surviving it. Precision threatens that story. It suggests that coping isn't the same as healing, that endurance isn't the same as freedom, that strength might actually be rigidity, wearing a confident smile. That's why precise moments feel invasive. They don't ask permission. They don't warm you up. They just arrive and press exactly where the truth lies. And suddenly you're forced to respond, not as who you present to be, but as who you actually are when something important is touched. People misinterpret precision as cruelty, but cruelty is careless. Precision is deliberate. It doesn't waste force. It doesn't overcorrect. It applies just enough pressure to reveal what's already there. Nothing new is created. It just stops being hidden. Hidden vulnerability isn't always painful. Sometimes it's desire. Something you want, but won't admit, because wanting gives others leverage. Precision exposes that too. It brings desire to the surface and forces you to confront how much you've shaped your life around pretending you don't care. Precision shows you what you orbit, what influences your decisions more than logic ever could. And once you see that, you realize how many choices weren't as free as you thought. They were reactions, adjustments, compromises made to protect a soft spot you never acknowledged out loud. People fear being seen because being seen removes excuses. If something hits you precisely, then the issue was always there. It wasn't created by the moment just uncovered it. And uncovering means responsibility follows awareness. Precision doesn't stay long. It doesn't need to. The work it does happens instantly. The exposure lingers. The awareness sticks. The question becomes unavoidable. What are you going to do now that you know exactly where you're vulnerable? Some people rush to cover it back up. They rebuild the wall stronger, thicker, louder. Others pause. They sit with the discomfort. They recognize that the exposure wasn't an attack, it was information. Hidden vulnerability only controls you as long as it stays hidden. Precision takes away its camouflage. It names it without words. It points without accusing. And once that happens, the illusion of invincibility fades, replaced by something more dangerous and more powerful. At the same time, the option to actually change what's been quietly shaping you all along, now that the exact spot has been touched and the truth can't retreat back into the shadows where it used to feel safe. Unseen, protected, unquestioned, intervention feels comforting until you realize it changes the rules. Before it happened, you could blame momentum, circumstance, bad luck, other people, the way things just are. After it happens, those excuses start to rot. Because once something steps in and alters the course, pretending you're powerless stops working. People love help as long as it doesn't come with expectations. They want rescue without accountability, relief without adjustment, mercy without consequence. But intervention isn't charity, it's a transfer. Something steps in, shifts the weight, and hands part of it back to you heavier than before. Before intervention, failure feels inevitable. After intervention, failure feels chosen. That's the difference people don't talk about. When nothing interferes, you can tell yourself you never had a chance. When something interrupts, suddenly you do. and having a chance means whatever happens next belongs to you. Intervention exposes the lie of helplessness. You might have been struggling, drowning even, but once the tide pauses, you can't pretend the current is the only thing moving you. You're visible now. Your next step counts in a way it didn't before. That's why intervention feels uncomfortable once the relief fades. It removes the safety of inevitability. It doesn't guarantee success. It demands participation. And participation is risky because it means you can mess it up. People underestimate how seductive despair can be. Despair removes responsibility. It lets you stop trying without admitting you quit. Intervention breaks that spell. It says you're not done yet. And that sentence is heavier than it sounds. Responsibility isn't about gratitude. Gratitude is emotional. Responsibility is structural. It reshapes what you're allowed to ignore. After intervention, patterns matter more. Choices echo louder. Small decisions stop being small. That's why some people resent intervention, not because it failed them, but because it cornered them. It took away the narrative that everything was out of their hands. It forced them to confront how much agency they actually have when circumstances stop being the villain. Intervention doesn't fix your character. It tests it. It gives you space and watches what you do with it. Do you rebuild the same habits that led you here? Or do you finally question them now that you can't claim survival mode anymore? People say they want a second chance, but what they really want is a reset with the same behaviors. Intervention doesn't offer that. It offers continuity with awareness. You don't start over. You continue differently or you repeat knowingly. Responsibility shows up quietly. No announcement, no rulebook, just a shift in tone. Conversations feel different. Excuses feel thinner. Time feels louder. You notice how often you choose comfort when change is available. Intervention gives you room, not direction. And that's the dangerous part. Direction would let you follow blindly. Room forces you to decide. And decisions reveal priorities, whether you're ready for that exposure or not. People who waste intervention often talk about how lucky they were. People who understand it talk about how careful they became. Luck fades. Responsibility stays. There's a moment after intervention when everything is still. Not peaceful, just paused. That moment isn't there for celebration. It's there for recalibration. What you reinforce during that pause becomes the new trajectory. Responsibility doesn't mean perfection. It means honesty. It means you stop lying to yourself about why you do what you do. It means acknowledging that some doors closed because you kept walking past the ones that were open. Intervention also changes how future help works. Once you've been interrupted, you're expected to recognize signs earlier. Patterns don't get the same grace twice. Awareness raises the standard. That's why intervention feels heavier the second time, not because it's harsher, but because ignorance is gone. You can't claim surprise. You can't say you didn't see it coming. People who grow after intervention don't become fearless. They become intentional. They understand that being spared isn't the same as being saved. That space was borrowed, not owned. Responsibility doesn't mean the outcome rests entirely on you. It means your choices now have visible impact. They shape whether the interruption becomes a turning point or just a pause before the same fall. Intervention asks a simple question without words. Now that you're not forced to continue, why would you choose to? And whatever answer you give shows up in your habits, your silence, your discipline, your avoidance. The uncomfortable truth is that intervention does make life easier. It makes it clearer. And clarity is dangerous because it removes the blur that once protected you from seeing how much of your situation was shaped by what you tolerated, repeated, or delayed. Responsibility begins the moment you realize the interruption ones to the ending. It was the handoff. The moment where something stepped back and left you standing there with time, awareness, and the uncomfortable understanding that what happened next will reflect whether the intervention mattered or whether it was just another moment you survived without changing, another pause you mistook for rescue, another opening you walked through carrying the same weight, the same habits, the same excuses, expecting a different outcome while the space quietly closes behind you, waiting to see if you finally move differently now that you can't say you didn't know.